Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'm going to start off the first of the 3 new voices sections this afternoon and report to you on a study that we did last fall with our LLM students comparing 2 types of teaching methodology. We were trying to come up with a way to teach these foreign students who come to Duke to study law, U.S. law for a year, legal research in a way that was a little easier for them. These are all students who have law degrees from their home countries, so they really just come to the U.S. to study our legal system. We teach 4 classes of legal research in the fall. They're very compressed, just 1 hour at a time. And in that time, we have to cover case law, administrative law, basically structure, statutes, and regulations. So we have a lot to put into kind of a small period of time. A lot of these students don't have English as their first language, so some come early basically to practice their English. So they're a bit of a challenging group. They're a fun group. They're full of energy. They ask a lot of questions. But they really do tend to struggle with some of the idiosyncrasies of the U.S. court system. So what we wanted to do is see if perhaps using a recorded module for elements of court structure, case law publication, and jurisdiction would work better than a live lecture. And for this, we submitted a small grant request to AALL, which they granted. And we did this last fall, and I'll tell you how our results turned out. We had thought that a module might work better than a live lecture for a couple of reasons. One is that they could read along with it because it has narration. The other, they could rewatch it. They could do it on their own time. And we really wanted to see if these advantages outweighed doing it as a live lecture. So in answer to my question, do recorded modules work better than live lectures for teaching basic legal research? Anybody have a guess?
Yes.
No. They did not. And we really wanted to empirically test their retention, not just whether they liked it. We wanted to see if they actually remembered the lecture better. But I have to say, it did work just as well. So we'll go ahead and walk through kind of what we were thinking of. Now, our research question was really very narrow. We did not flip the classroom. We were not expanding our curriculum. We don't assign these students homework. Basically, they come in, we give them sheets of information, we walk through the lectures, the court structure. But we really don't have that much interaction with them other than in the classroom. And we really weren't intending to give them extra time. We just wanted to see specifically if this method of giving them information worked better than a live lecture. And a secondary question, we wanted to know if we could identify any small subsets of these groups that might do better with a recorded lecture than with a live lecture, for a number of reasons, mentioning the language issue that we spoke about a moment ago and other issues. Anyway, to move on, we started out with a literature review, and we really wanted to know what material is really best suited toward teaching with a recorded module, and found some interesting research studies on that. Information that can be memorized, stuff that is just basically comprehension, tends to work better than material that has to be analyzed and applied. For example, there was one very interesting study in a math class where they found that those students who actually watched supplemental modules and supplemental recordings did worse than those students who did not. And the reason why was they said that the students who were, in hindsight, the researchers found that those students who were trying to watch the modules and learn were trying to memorize. And that was not material that really lended itself to be memorized. They really needed to apply it. So keeping that in mind, we tried to structure it around a way to give them material that was just memorized, stuff that you could just learn, not asking them to apply it to different situations. As far as the module format's concerned, there was a lot of information that said if you include interactive questions, that works better. So we specifically chose Articulate Storyline because it's easy to put in those sort of questions in that software. They said not to make it longer than 10 to 15 minutes because people lose interest. So we took that into account as well and made it a fairly short module. And we also looked for studies where they tried to measure retention, not just student satisfaction. And that was really a challenge. There really are not that many studies out there where they tried to measure what it is they learned from the particular program. Catherine Lemmer put out a very nice paper where they did flip the class in an LLM course, and we read through her paper very carefully. But again, it was a satisfaction study. And as we were looking at additional studies, there were some researchers who reported that people who learned from modules tend to overestimate what they learned from the module. When they're tested later, they really didn't remember it as well as they thought, which for us underscored the need to try to test what they learned, not just how happy they were with the module. So our study design, we basically isolated one very small part of the legal curriculum that we taught them, which in our case was court structure, case publication, jurisdiction, and case law precedent. And we put together a backbone of PowerPoint slides, basically from a bank that we have. We've been teaching legal research there for a lot of years, and we do tend to share our slides. So we put together a set of 30 slides, basically to use as the backbone, both for our module and for the live teaching. We introduced our test module into the third class. So the first class basically was on secondary sources and the legal system. Second class was statutes and regulations. The third class is when we talked about case law. So this was one little chunk within the third class that we introduced to them. Again, the module took about 10 minutes to watch for the students. And we've actually written this up in a paper that's been submitted to Law Library Journal, and we're hoping that before AALL, we'll have it either up on SSRN or somewhere where you can access it. So we're waiting to hear from them. But anyway, the groups themselves, we had about 100 LLM students, so we had really a pretty good sample size. The registrar assigns them just randomly into 4 different classes. We just selected 2 classes to get the module and 2 classes to get the live instruction, just for this chunk. All of the rest of the instruction was the same. About doing that. So this was for again, the third lecture. This slide represents where our students came from, and they were really from all over the world. There were 40 different countries represented, heavy concentration around in the Middle East and such. And they're a really very interesting class. They tend to like to ask a lot of questions and, just a fun group of students. We actually called our Office of Research and asked them if we needed to submit an IRB and get their permission. And they said since this was just teaching pedagogy, we didn't need to. And we just took that answer and ran with it. So didn't want to go further than that. This slide shows how the module was set up. Again, this was using Articulate Storyline software. I don't know how many of you have experience with it. It's a lot of fun to use, and you can really sink a lot of time playing with this module. They send me about once a week or so some new ideas for things to put into classroom software, one of which was a hangman game, which I must have killed 2 days worth playing with. It was just so much fun. But anyway, that's what I used to create the module. There was one kind of backbone and then 4 separate modules they could watch from it. The main on the right, you see what we can cover. They could go to any one of those in whatever order they wanted to. If you look at the panel on the left-hand side, you can see there's a tab for menu and a tab for notes. Menu would let them jump ahead or behind, however they wanted to watch it. If they wanted to rewatch it, they could do it that way as well. Notes was actually the transcript of the narrated talking over it. So they could go back and read along with the narration if they wanted to. This was put in there specifically because of the literature review and the language difficulties they said that some foreign students have when they're listening to a lecture. They might not be familiar with the accent. They might have been taught in a different way, even if they've had a lot of English instructions. So we thought this might be a way that would also help them. And again, they could go back, they could watch it on their own time. They were simply told to watch it sometime before the third lecture. These exact same PowerPoint slides were used in the live lecture in the companion classes. They didn't have the interactive questions. They didn't, of course, have the main menu, but we did tell them, this is what we'll do. And then the lecturers who lectured just walked through it in a linear way. They were not given any particular script to use. The people who taught it, live lecture, taught as they would any other class. And we really wanted a real-life simulation here. We didn't want this to be too artificial an exercise. Sort of, did they learn better? And the instructor could use anecdotes, could talk about, experience they'd had in practice, whatever way felt natural. Whereas, the benefit from the module was you could watch it over and over, you could see the narration. What we found, we gave them at the very end of the 4th class, this would have been a lecture after they got the test material, a paper quiz with 20 different questions along with some demographic questions at the end and some questions about how they used the module, how they watched it, did they like it? and some questions about themselves. And what we found, again, at the very end, we had 48 students answer at the end of the live lecture, 45 from the recorded module. We had to throw out a couple of results because there were some students who didn't read the back of the page, and the quiz was printed on both sides, so those were not valid results. Had to get rid of those. But overall, in the average, we had 15 correct for both the live lecture and the recorded module. This was basically a graph showing which ones they got wrong. And I did it just because if you did it to get them right, the differences just didn't show up as much on this graph. It was just a little bit more obvious. And I'm showing you this just so you can see the overall patterns. They were almost identical, those questions that they got right and they got wrong, whether it was the module or whether it was the live lecture. And I was personally a little surprised by this. I'll show you more slides in a moment. On the bottom, you can see just the general topic of each question, what it is it went to. You see they missed a lot on publication. Those were sort of the, what's the federal appendix, that sort of thing, just trying to remember those terms. But again, the patterns were really very similar. The questions with the stars underneath were questions that were unique to the material that was in the module and in the live lecture. And we put that in because there were readings they were given that did cover some of this other material, and we wanted to specifically test what it is they gleaned from the module in at least some of those questions. And it was gratifying to know that they got, for the most part, they got those right. So they did get something from the module in the lecture. Just to show you comparison by age, we did not see the digital divide when it comes to age. The older students did just as well with the module as they did with the live lecture in the same proportions that the younger students did. We'll have to point out, though, we really had a very, very small sample for the older students, but there really was no. In this sort of going by region, we suspected that those countries that came from civil law countries would have a tougher time than common law countries. We were just trying to see if there was any kind of pattern across region, across perhaps learning styles taught at home. And really, you can see with the recorded on the left and the live lecture on the right, almost identical, very, very close. I'm showing you just those and not all of the regions because some of them we had really, really small sample sizes. For example, in North America, you can see we only had 4 students and 3 were in one group, 1 was in the other. So we really couldn't get a I'd say overall, the score range, the lowest score we had was 12. The highest score, we had some perfect scores. Correct questions by home country legal system. Most of our perfect scores were in mixed law countries. I don't know what that means. But, again, the pattern between recorded and live lecture was really very similar. With regard to the module use, 73% said that they read along with the narration. 22% watched it more than once. 84% said that they thought it was a useful way to learn the material, but I'll have to qualify all of these in that about 16% just missed that whole chunk, which was on the back of the last page. So, add 16% and that's probably what you have either way. Maybe they would have said it was unuseful. We only had one person say that they did not find it was a useful way to learn the material, and it had a lot of thank yous, great module. They seemed to really like it, but it really just didn't seem to produce a better result, which surprised us. The module itself could be watched on iPhone, it could be watched on laptop, it could be watched on PC, it could be watched on iPad. We made sure that it could be used on any number of devices, but everybody seemed to watch it either on a desktop or laptop. There was only one person who said they watched it using a tablet, and no one watched it on an iPhone. A little disappointing because it took a lot of tweaking to get it usable on the iPhone, but oh well. So our conclusions, basically, at the end of this, the module didn't work better than the live lecture, but it did seem to work just as well. And we just couldn't find any one subgroup that seemed to benefit more from it than the others. But we do have some qualifying factors, which we talk about a lot in our paper. One of which is that the group that received the module did have time in class so they could ask questions. They were free to ask questions of the instructor on the material in the module. It just was not instructor guided and was not opened up to, what did you think about it? It was just if they wanted to ask questions. And the group that got the live lecture did have access to slides afterwards, but they didn't have any of the narration and they didn't have any of the, typed up narration or any of the talking. And again, from the process itself, we found that even though modules were well accepted by the students, they were extremely time intensive to make. And on top of planning the lecture itself, realizing that the content and the slides, we had those in the can ages ago, but with regard to the module, we had to re-record it several times. And every time Adobe Flash updated, a lot of our computers weren't running the latest operating systems, and we would have that wheel going like this forever. And we were worried that this would deter some of the students from even using the module. We did get them a sheet of instructions that said, call us or let us know if you're having problems watching this. And we also showed them that, if you went back one, you could get it to go forward. And we didn't have any complaints, actually. Nobody complained that it took too long to load. Watch it because of that. Either they just didn't complain or they didn't have a problem. We don't know which it is. That's the end of this part. Does anyone have any questions about our study? Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Did the same professor?
No, we had 4 different, thank you, I should have included that earlier. We had 4 different instructors, but the same instructor taught the same class, all 4 classes. So the same instructor taught the first 2 lessons, then either gave the module or the live lecture, and then the last. And again, that's another source of variability. We did not, which was also another surprise, in that everyone who taught in the program is a very experienced research teacher, and we really are working from the same slides. It was remarkable to me. I was really expecting the module to do better than the live lecture, to be honest, only because they had it, they could rewatch it. It's a question I used to always get from the students. I don't understand jurisdiction, I don't understand precedent, I don't understand why you can't take something from state federal court straight to the federal district court, why doesn't it work that way? And I really thought that having them be able to watch it over and over, it would sink in, but it didn't seem to make any difference. It was only a 10-minute video, and so they did get it after the distance between the second lecture and the third went over a weekend and had a couple days, so they had plenty of time. It was only 10 minutes. So maybe it could have also been in how the question was asked, which is another thing. It's very, very hard to write a decent assessment. The questions were in different formats. We tried not to make it too tricky. We weren't trying to do the not A but C, B plus D plus E, none of the above. We really tried to make it not too complicated, but enough so that it actually measured something and wasn't susceptible to guessing, which is another challenge. But I think they would have had plenty of time. It could be that they watched the module and then went back and rewatched different things and then just considered that one viewing. So that's another factor as well. Sure. Yeah, I say the modules are fun to make, and there's a really good lynda.com tutorial that will take you through. That's what I use to learn how to use Articulate. But with regard to instructional design, I'm just not sure what we would do differently. The one thing we would have loved some help on would have been the assessment, which...
Well, I mean, one of the
Yeah.
So a lot of our
We have that as well. I've used Camtasia. The difference with Camtasia, though, is that I don't have as good, I actually did a database simulation on Articulate. That was a lot of fun. That we could actually go through. It was like you were using the database, but you weren't in it. And I have not found the facility with putting in interactivity in Camtasia that I found with Articulate. Gotcha.
that
Yeah.
the instructor would facilitate.
Yeah, that would require quite a big change in the design. In this particular class, our role is really just 4 lectures. It's just so constricted that we were really trying to find something defined and something we could just package. But it's a really good suggestion. Thanks. I think if what you're getting at is that you don't think the results are perhaps valid, which is a completely legitimate question. I had the same thing myself. I think the question would come into the assessment and how it is that you measure what they learned. The other big question I had, did they get anything at all from the lecture or the video? But I think the 5 questions we tucked in there that were specific to the PowerPoint and to the video hopefully answered that, and that the fact that they got them mostly right means, okay, they did watch it and they did glean something from it. But I don't know, we haven't totally thrown out the idea of using modules, and clearly they worked at least as well as the live lecture, which is nice to know. I mean, they didn't work less well. And it could also just be the nature of our particular students, in that I have never had a class where I wasn't peppered with questions about, what do administrative agencies do? Why don't they take over the government? Can you bring us a flow chart showing us all the administrative agencies in the US? They're fascinated by our legal system. So I think they have a tendency, when there is a live lecture there, to squeeze as much information out of us as they can, to ask for anecdotes too. It could very well be. Could very well be. We were specifically interested in these LLM students, though, just because of the language issues and also the cultural issues. We were told that in some groups, it's rude to raise your hand and interrupt a professor. You really want to be respectful. And we thought, putting it in their control, letting them watch it when it's, sometime when they're engaged would really have quite an advantage. Trying to set it up to be as successful as possible, but it turned out, which was not what we expected. Really good question. I guess the question I would want to know, it would be to see if there's a way we could redefine the subgroups. I'm not sure how to check facility with English language. Apparently it's sort of a sensitive question to ask. And also, students really aren't that good a gauge of how good their English is, we've discovered, if you ask them. Only in that sometimes we had a group who would come in and they'd say, oh, I'm so uncomfortable with my English skills, and they would speak better grammar than any of us. They were sort of... Well, TOEFL scores, but then we wouldn't have the anonymity that we were seeking. So yeah, it was just really tough, and we thought, why don't we include in a paragraph, like read this paragraph and answer these questions, get your SAT experience. But all of that seemed too time-consuming and too invasive, really, for what we are given to do with this group of students. It really was a very narrow question in a very small size of time. But yeah, we're thinking about it. I mean, we've definitely not... Yeah, I'm sorry?
So what about JD students?
Just as a sideline, I've used recorded modules with JD students before, just to kind of supplement, but not to compare who did better or who did worse. And I sort of came away thinking the time I spent with them one-on-one was probably more valuable than the time I spent making the recording, because they seem to remember the anecdotes that you give them so much more than just sort of a memorized thing. It seems to be that's what stays with them. So we really coming away thinking that if we had taken the time we spent putting together this module and offered review sessions one-on-one, that probably would have been a home run. But I don't know. It's good that we are thinking about it, though. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
just bring it. Gotcha. Ever went to a Cali conference and all the technology worked? That would be like a miracle. From the University of Richmond. Here today to talk to you about using Apple TVs in the classroom and what we've done and what we've experienced, might do differently in the future. So the idea about using the Apple TVs came about 3 years ago for law clinic students. So they're all given an iPad, and they're asked to do at the end of their time is a presentation using their iPad about whatever they've learned that semester. And so they're like, well, dongles to tether into the system, saying, why can't we just use AirPlay, because this is what these devices are used for. So at the time, we were not able to get our AirPlay. What we did is we bought these gave a dedicated IP number so that the device would AirPlay to the Apple TV. So students couldn't get on the internet, but they could use the devices. Together a couple what we call little kits and little cases, and if other faculty members wanted to use them, classrooms or wherever they needed to go, understanding that you're just not going to be able to get onto the a year ago or so. Problem that the university had with putting them in the classroom is there was no way to really lock them down, and they would their signals would display across several classrooms in a building, so you could connect to somebody else's Apple TV. They put Apple came out with conference mode so that you could get a code to tether your device, and nobody else could take over that device. Some of the advantages of being untethered. So the way our classrooms are set up is not like this. This is awesome. I've got control panel right in front of me. We've got all of our computers and equipment stuck in corners of different classrooms. In fact, this is one of our newest classrooms that was built a couple years ago within the law library, actually. It's a square, seats 20. There's displays on both walls. But if a faculty member wants to use that computer in the classroom and they physically have to touch it, they have to go to the corner to do so. Here's another classroom. This one seats about 60 people. It's tiered, but you'll see where the computer is in the classroom. You see where the lectern is. Now, all these classrooms also have from the wall where you can plug in, but then if you're walking around, you're likely to trip over, and that's not good. This is our Moot courtroom, which is a beautiful room, but again, it doesn't lend itself to putting technology in nicely so it can be hidden and you still get the beauty of the room. And then this is another one of our classrooms that's in the law library, and again, you see where that computer is, and I was actually standing on the other end of the classroom itself taking that picture. So imagine you're the instructor and you're there and your back is against everybody in the classroom. So oops, good. So what we learned though about the placement of these Apple TVs is the university was afraid that they would walk away because they're so little and they're so easy to walk away. So they decided to hide them in the classroom. So what they did is, like where those cabinets were in the classrooms, where that computer is, and it's hard to see, but there's a really pretty wooden cabinet that closes in front of that computer. They were hiding the Apple TVs behind some of that equipment. So when an instructor went to teach, they may get the signal, and halfway through, they'd lose the signal. We couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. So what it is was you can't put those things where they're hidden because it blocks the signal too much. And we didn't have, like, sometimes on top of these projectors, there's extra power. We didn't have that set up in the projectors that we had. So we just had to find other places to place them that were still not, they weren't obviously sitting out, but they still got a signal. And so another thing that we learned about our wireless network is we have a secure network and an unsecure network like most schools do. And so the university at first wasn't able to bind the Apple TVs with our secure network, but all of our computers and all the students' computers are all on that network. And so what we're hoping was that the devices would be smart enough to understand to let go of the fact that my computer's on our Irwin, which is the name of our secure network, but the Apple TV's running on our Richmond network, and then just talk to each other through Bluetooth, and that also wasn't very stable. It kind of sort of worked and kind of sort of didn't. So we talked to networking. They were able to figure out a way to put these devices onto the secure network, so that solved that problem. And then we incorporated the Apple TV into our touch panels into the classrooms. This way the little remotes didn't walk away. And if any of you guys are Apple people and have Apple TVs in your home and everywhere, my husband and I are always searching for a stupid remote to use the Apple TV with. The newer one's a little different, so that one we've kept up with. But the ones that came with this were a little bit more tricky to keep up with. So we just put everything in the touch panel so it was easy to work. Conference mode I talked about before. So this is actually how it airplays in our classroom. And so it'll pop up. It tells you what network you're on, what classroom you are, and when you hit connect, you get a code. You type in that code, and then you are just then tethered to that device until you untether yourself. The faculty who use it love it. So we have at the University of Richmond right now, about 82% of our law students are bringing Apple products, Macs, to law school now. It's higher actually for the undergraduate population. We're running about 40-60 Macs versus PC in the law school, but across the university, 70% of faculty now are requesting Mac computers. And so we're doing more with this than the rest of the university at the moment, but I think we're just a test case, for the rest of the university to see where they want to put the Apple TVs. So our faculty who are Mac folks who want to bring their own computers and not use the PCs in the classroom love the convenience. They love the fact that they can just put their computer anywhere or bring their iPad and just walk the classroom and be connected and be able to do what they need to do. So what about other devices? I don't know, are many of you familiar with AirParrot? So it's a piece of software you can download onto your computer, onto your PC. I've played with it on Windows 7, 8, and 10, and it works just fine. It's a nominal fee. You can also buy license for it, and it allows your PC to AirPlay, and it works perfectly. They also have a product for Chromebooks. We don't support Chromebooks. Well, we don't say you can't bring it, but what we're saying is you can't take exams on it, you can't print from it, and all that good stuff. But people can bring them, and they will. The Chromebooks will AirPlay to using AirParrot. I have not found a good solution for Android devices. There's a product out that I was playing with a while ago, but they wanted me to root my device, and I'm not the rooting the device kind of girl. I like things to work just the way they are, and I would never suggest to anybody that they root their phone or their Nexus tablet just to be able to AirPlay onto the Apple TVs. So hopefully something will come out soon so everybody can play nice together. Yes, sir. No, because once that code flashes up from the Apple TV, within AirParrot, the software, you type in that conference code as well, and it locks it. Exactly. This just allows it to talk to the Apple TV. Yep, sorry, I was not very clear with that. So by having the software on their computer, they can use it just like an Apple device can. So lessons learned and where we're going to go from there. The good, of course, is being untethered, and your backside is not facing the students, because you guys saw where all my computers are in the classroom, and that drives me nutter butters. The price was right. We bought the little black ones, not the new ones that are out now. I think they were $69 each, so it wasn't a huge cost investment. Conference mode makes them easy to use, has several classrooms that can broadcast, and you can see several. The bad thing we've had is just getting the word out. I was at a session earlier this morning that talked about people don't know what they don't know, or maybe that was even our keynote. He might have been speaking about that. And so it's trying to get the word out and trying to get in front of the students and trying to get in front of the faculty. And frankly, faculty are just as hard to get in front of basically than as much as students are, and showing them how to use it and showing them how it can be very beneficial. Our clinician staff is all but one clinician is on PC, but everybody else is on a Mac, and they're all walking around with the iPad. So they're our easy group. You know, they love this stuff. They're very happy to have it. Yes, sir. Not all faculty, but the clinician faculty, and our library staff or librarians have them too, so they can use them. So, and that's a whole other bag of worms. So, especially with the new iPad Pros, because they're just really cool. But anyway, so the ugly part that we did was hide the Apple TVs, and it took us 6 weeks into the last semester to figure out that's what the problem was. And then we felt like, you know, kind of silly that, oh, of course we hid them and they can't be used. The weird wireless and Bluetooth issue, and then that's now resolved. Also, we were running wireless because at one point we couldn't wire them in, but now we think that we can because some other changes that were made on the network. So we may look at that this summer and see if we can't get them. They're hardwired in, and they're just more stable. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. So some like to do PowerPoint but don't want to walk around with this guy, and they'd rather have the device in their hand, and they can just kind of swipe back and forth. Or they're both doing PowerPoint, and a student has a question about something, and they can quickly just, you know, pull up a website and go to it without having to go back and have their backs facing their audience while they're using the keyboard. I love it because what I do when I teach, my hands are on the keyboard, and I don't like my backside being to the class. I'd rather have the computer in front of me, and I tend to walk too, and then that way I can, you know, have everything in my hands. And then we have one faculty member who has started to love Keynote, and of course that only runs on Mac platform of some flavor, so the classroom computer is not going to be very helpful. All right. Thank you, guys, and number 3 is up. Whatever number 3 is. Are you using the...
A USB plugged in. My name is Rachel Evans, and I'm from UGA School of Law. I work in the Lots of areas of study have used graphics to enhance the classroom experience. This goes everywhere from elementary school kids learning things and retaining knowledge better up through professional schools. There's not a lot of this going on in law schools, and so the gist of this presentation is to kind of suppose what if we did. The reason people are using these is because all the technology that we use over flooded with information. So 90% of information processed by the brain is visual, and we're not always taking advantage of that fact in classrooms where we're really very thick books, we're lecturing. Again, this isn't always the case, but this is our So 7-second attention span is the span for most of, was I standing? is the attention span for the majority of people now. Now this isn't everybody, but we're talking the average American who is being bombarded by as much information as I was just mentioning. So that's a really short attention span compared to what it used to be in the past before we had all of this technology at our fingertips. So how can we use this to our advantage? Knowing that our students are visually wired, and as more generations of students come in, these students are obviously born into technology, and a lot of us weren't born into what they have been. So we want to play to what is going to help them retain the most. And again, visuals can do that a lot better than just text. So what am I talking about exactly? What is an infographic? I'm going to get to sort of the anatomy of an infographic in a second, but what can we use, how can we use this to apply it in our classrooms? So I'm going to throw out just a few things that, just for thinking about, that other areas of study have used to pull infographics into the classroom. So a syllabus, maybe rethinking the layout of your syllabus, drawing attention to certain spots that the student needs to remember, instead of, a 50-page syllabus, trimming it down and really hitting points and drawing attention to certain things with icons or with emphasis with color. Class handouts and also supplemental material, anything that people might be teaching with and you would want the student to take with them, using that and giving a visualization to that that's going to make it more appealing to the student so that they can remember it when they walk away. Case visualization, this is a popular one that I was able to find a lot more of online, where you can visualize a case that students are studying and give them sort of a visual timeline of this. And then practice ready skill. There's a lot of things in law. We're leaning a lot more towards getting students ready for practice. Creating infographics can actually be a skill that they can take with them. So not only using this in the classroom, but teaching it to them in the classroom, teaching them how to create their own for their clients so that their clients can better understand things. Because visuals can help simplify the legal process for people who may not understand it as well as the person who went to law school. And that's another thing that's really popular to find online if you're searching for legal infographics. The majority of what you will find are things that are practice specific. And I'm going to show you a lot of examples of that in just a moment. So here are some course syllabus examples. Again, this is something that is much more prominent in other areas of study, not so much in law. And again, your course, the type of course would dictate whether or not this would even be possible for you. But just some food for thought, something to think about, and some ideas to sort of get your brain running. Examples of class handouts. This is an area where it may even overlap a little with some of that practice-ready, sort of practice-specific infographics and teaching people how they could apply it in their particular study. So you can see, you know, the 6 stages of a civil suit, how divorce works, and you can sort of visualize these processes. And these could not only be helpful for students, but again, for them to deliver to their clients when they get to that point. Other examples of visualization, this is a good one of sort of a case visualization inside the courtroom. And a lot of compare and contrast can be found in infographics where students it could be very useful to them to compare one method versus another, or one thing that they're learning to another. And then some practice-specific ones, like I mentioned. So the mediation process or the timeline of personal injury. These are, and every infographic is different. Some of them have more graphics than others. And that sort of leads me to my last point, which is about the anatomy of an infographic. So traditionally, a good, strong infographic is not just going to be images and text, but it's also going to include some data. And data might be a very strong point of an infographic. But at UGA School of Law, we have used a lot of them, not as much in the classroom, but in the library especially. And with IT services being in the library, I'm able to make a lot of graphics for the library. So we very often are using infographics to create sort of alternative print versions of things, so that we can show data about a collection, for example, in an attractive way that people are actually going to pay attention to it. And it's very hard, as the previous speaker was saying, to get in front of your students and your faculty. So the best way to get them to remember something or to even get them to notice is to draw more attention to it visually and sort of set it apart from all of the other things that they're seeing every day. Free web apps. This is the best way to get started, in my opinion. Of course, like anything, you can design it using anything that you want, anything that's your favorite. You could make an infographic with Photoshop if you're very skilled, or create icons in Illustrator if you have a lot of time, or you could make something in Word if that's where you're most comfortable. But the best way, if you really want it to look like an infographic, the types that I'm talking about, and you want access to some icon libraries and some templates, which are really helpful, I really suggest using one of these free web apps. And they're all really great. I've listed 5 here that you can see on the handout. But piktochart, by far, is my very favorite. And that's the one that I use at UGA School of Law. It has great templates where you can start from. It uses... You don't have to, but it can use sections, and that's really helpful. I could especially see that being helpful if you're designing something for a course where you can create a section, and you can, once you have your sections created, you can sort of drag and drop and rearrange the flow of the page, and that's really helpful to be able to do. piktochart also lets you save your work, so if it was a sort of an ongoing series, for example, at the law library we have a newsletter. We've started doing that in print. And so I can save as, and now I can come right back to my own custom template every time I'm ready to do the next newsletter and copy and paste in the information. Some really good examples that if you're looking to do this and you just want to get a feel for it, 15 fascinating legal and litigation infographics is a great place to start. It just gives you kind of a broad few examples that you can look through if you're thinking, how could I use this in the legal classroom setting? Those are some good ones. And then 13 Reasons is a great example of an infographic about infographics. So it's actually 13 Reasons Why Your Brain Craves Infographics, and you can Google that and it'll be the top hit. And it's an interactive infographic that you can kind of scroll down. It'll give you some of those statistics that I mentioned at the beginning, plus several more, because it adds up to 13. So I wanted to show you some screen captures of piktochart. This is what it looks like when you're logged in. Here you can see this is actually the library's strategic plan, which we did an infographic version of and distributed to the law school, including the dean. And everyone was really happy with this. It's much more attractive for them to look at and easier for us to recognize things than looking at, a Word document that's just black and white text where everything's 12-point font. So you can see the icons, and on the far left is where you can go to the graphics tab and you can search for icons, shapes or lines. The icon library in piktochart is really, really great. The other option that you have, which I've done for a couple of these so that I could get a custom graphic, they really wanted a telescope. And that was kind of, the whole library staff met together and said, well, vision doesn't, the icons I'd used they didn't really like, and somebody had the idea of a telescope. I couldn't find one that they liked, so that was a case where I created one in Photoshop, uploaded a PNG, and because it's a PNG, you're able to change the color within piktochart and everything, and use it just like the icons. So it fits in nicely. It looks as though it was an icon that I pulled from their library, but it's definitely possible to create your own if you don't find what you're looking for. This is also a good example of the sections. So you can see there's kind of a highlighted blue box around the goals area. Goals is a section, and that's an area where I could drag that up if I wanted to rearrange the layout of the page very easily, but I didn't want to move every single object since there's a lot of different text and icons on there to make it faster and easier. The majority of your tools, and this isn't just for piktochart, but for the other 4 that I mentioned, the other 4 web apps, they're going to be across the top. So it's really user-friendly as you jump in, especially if you start with a template that's already created. You'll see all of your tools either across the top and some extras on the left. And it's very easy to jump in and get started. And then getting back to the data part, being in IT services, I do a lot of reports with the website analytics. So that's something that I regularly share with the dean and another select group of senior administrators at the law school. And it's much more attractive to them and easier for us to talk about and get into this kind of nitty-gritty numbers if I give it to them in the form of an infographic instead of giving it to them as an Excel spreadsheet that's just a bunch of numbers that goes on and on. So this is an example where you can see piktochart has a great little way of putting in your data and being able to choose the type of graph style. It's a little small over here, but to the far left of this window, you can see that there's a choice between a bar graph, a line graph. There's a lot of stuff. I really like these that are sort of unique, especially the way it kind of fans out the social. There's also some really nice tools for doing, you can get a glimpse of it over here, of a world map, and you can do that with different countries and put in statistics. So I could see a lot of applications for this if you're talking about statistics of law in different areas of the world or parts of the country. The great thing about the data that you can put in, you can also import. You can see the import your data, and you can use that with Google spreadsheets, and it'll also take Excel spreadsheets, and that's a great way to pull in your data. A lot of times I'm using very small amounts like, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and I just type that in myself. It's much faster for me. But if you had a lot, you would be able to quickly do it, quickly and easily. So finally, roadmap to a strong infographic. These are just some pointers that I have. I've been working with infographics at the law school for about 2 years now, and this is kind of the checklist that I have for myself when I'm creating something. And this isn't like I need to touch and check off every 8th point, but I do go through this and try to make sure that everything I create serves a clear purpose, that I'm sticking to one subject, and that I'm not trying to cram too much information about more than one thing into a single infographic. Using space effectively, and those sections really help with that, and these templates also really help. And my 8th one actually is using examples or templates, and a lot of times I'll base it off of an infographic that I found that I really like, sort of the layout and the idea behind, and then I'll pull in my own information and kind of tweak it. And that's a great place to start if you're kind of, at a blank white space thinking, I don't really know where to begin with this one. You often want to lead the viewer in a specific direction, and this goes along with kind of telling a story with your infographic. And so a lot of times I really like to think about the big picture when I step back from an infographic. I really think that's maybe one of the strongest points about using one, is because it is so visually driven that you can sort of step back from it and say, well, we've hit all of this small data and information in the middle, but at the end, does it tell you a story, a single story, and do you get a big picture from it? And being able to use pictures with it helps to be able to do that. So you also want to highlight facts visually. You want to use the space and divide the content. That goes into a little bit of the using space effectively. Those two are really tied together. Showing data clearly and encouraging the eye to compare data. Those are things, some of the examples that I showed where we're literally comparing two items all the way down the page. Those are really popular, and it really helps the viewer to be able to compare things themselves. And then this little diagram here is just to kind of put it in a nutshell and show you that the most important things are content design and story. So if you can kind of feel like you have a good overlapping intersection of those, it's probably a good infographic. And then going back to the big picture, this one, your handout is sort of a resized version of it, but this was the original. And just thinking about, can this lead us down a path to possibly enhancing the classroom experience? And again, that would depend on the class, that would depend on the teacher or the purpose that you have for your students, but it's possible that it could. Any questions? Yes? It's an online web app, so as long as you have an internet connection, you can access it. It's not actually a program that you would download. Yeah, an online application. And so this was created with piktochart. The other 4 that are listed are also online web applications. So it's not dependent on the type of computer or browser. I found that they work on all 4 browsers that I use, and I haven't had any problems. Yeah.
The data that you post.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is there?
It's when I started, I was using a personal account, and I just had my own personal account, and I didn't publish anything. At least with the way that piktochart works, and that's the one that I've used the most, and that's the one that I use for UGA School of Law. There's the option to publish and not to publish. So if you don't want anything to be public, you don't publish it. And that may be, I don't know if I had a image here. So in the very top right, you see where it says publish and share. Those would be the 2 things that you would want to use if you did want it to be public. Unless I'm going to a meeting and I actually plan on showing one in a meeting, I keep everything private. So you can't search it, you can't find it. You always do have the option up. It's the top left where it says File. That's where there's a drop down to download as an image, and you can save it as a high-resolution PDF. You can customize your size, or you can save it as an image file, and there are 4 image files that you could save it as. But generally, I keep it all under wraps. You have a question? Mm-hmm.
The other question I had. Take a spreadsheet.
I believe you can upload an Excel spreadsheet. I want to say the other file format, I could be wrong, is .odt. Does that sound familiar? There's another spreadsheet format that's a generic one that you can upload. And then Google Sheets, I think Google Sheets is the primary one that it works best with. And that would be, again, that import your data. There's also some neat stuff you can do in settings if you choose the right type, where you can choose where I've got sort of an arch here. You could actually choose to shade in, let's say, a gavel, if you wanted to show a gavel as your image, and shade in the different parts of that. So that's another neat feature. And all of that would be found in the charts section, where you see tools to the left, and then charts, where you would import your data and do all of your graphs, charts, anything like that. Any more questions? Thank you.
No, I was just kind of practicing, so.
Okay, I'll do the same.
Please go ahead.